Diabetes mellitus is a household name. There is hardly any country or any region which is not affected by diabetes and its complications. In fact, diabetes is a multi-system disorder. It's not a disease. It's not something which you will catch, but it's a multi-system disorder. And the important thing about that is, just like any other multi-system disorder, for instance, we've got SLE or tuberculosis. They do have treatments, and likewise, diabetes has treatment. And it can be reversed if you take all the proper measures. I'm going to just briefly give you an idea of what diabetes really is. It's just it's a conceptual lecture, and hopefully at the end of this, then you'll have a fairly good idea what diabetes really is and what are the complications of diabetes. Now, diabetes means excessive urination. That means whenever there is excessive blood sugar, just like any other thing which is in excess in your body, it will be passed out from the urinary tract. And when the sugar is passed out in the urinary tract, it causes osmotic diuresis. So therefore, the person passes lots and lots of urine. There are different types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2, but there are usually what we see nowadays is an overlap kind of a diabetes in which it's both a mixture of type 2 and then type 1, or some people just require insulin from the start. But then what is blood sugar control? What is the role of insulin? What really happens? How does diabetes occur? And I'm going to tell you mainly in regards to what we call as insulin resistance and why is it so common these days. Now imagine that there is a house, and this house has one door, which is the main door. Now, this house represents the cell. There are billions of cells in the body, and these cells require food, they require nourishment, and that food is in the form of glucose. The liver is responsible for manufacturing glucose, and so therefore the liver and the kidneys, they work around the clock to maintain a blood sugar level. But this sugar, it may be of certain XY amount in the blood. Not all of that goes into the cells, because if all of the sugar would go into the cells, the cells would obviously be overburdened by sugar, and it will cause damage to the cells. So say, for example, if the blood sugar level is 200 milligrams, and this is your perhaps your random blood sugar, it's about 200 milligrams or postprandial blood sugar, and this needs to enter inside the cell because the cell obviously requires food, and the only entrance is through this door. And this door has a key, just like any door does, and the key opens the lock. The door opens, the sugar enters into the house. When the house is full, that means the cell is full. It has all its nourishment that it needed. The door is going to close. Further sugar will not go in, and so therefore the appetite is full. This particular door is opened by this lock, and this lock is opened by a key, and that key is called insulin. So insulin, in fact, is the key. If there is no insulin, this door will not unlock and the sugar will not go inside the cell. So people who don't have insulin, those who are type 1 diabetics, as we call them, either that is congenital type diabetes mellitus or like early onset diabetes mellitus, people who lack insulin, they will be unable to unlock these doors, and so the blood sugar will stay up, the sugar will not go into the cells, and the cells will be starved. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is that there is insulin which is present, but the insulin is not working because either the door is jammed or the lock is sealed somehow. It is cemented, it is sealed somehow. So the key will not fit inside the door. And this condition is called insulin resistance. That means insulin resistance means that there is lots and lots of insulin around, but the insulin is not working on the cells, so the sugar will not go in. So what happens is that the cell is now hungry. There is plenty amount of sugar outside. The sugar cannot go in. There is insulin resistance, so the cell is now hungry, and because the cell is hungry, the cell is going to send signals to the brain The brain requires lots and lots of glucose. In fact, the brain takes up about 200 grams of glucose per day. So the signals go to the brain. The brain is a very selfish organ. It sits right at the top and it controls the whole body. And the brain, when it gets the signals that there isn't enough sugar in the circulation, it panics. It goes into a panic mode. So the brain then sends signals to the liver, asks the liver to manufacture glucose. So the liver now does two things. First of all, the liver does what we call as glycogenolysis. That means it breaks down the stored sugar, which is formed in the form which is stored in the form of glycogen. So it does glycogenolysis, and the other one is gluconeogenesis. Thereby, it manufactures glucose. And how does it manufacture glucose? It mobilizes the fat cells from the system, from the surroundings. It mobilizes all the fat cells. And those fat cells are formed. Then they are converted into ketone bodies. And so, therefore, then you get the process of gluconeogenesis. So, both of these processes start. And the ultimate result is that the blood sugar level, which was 200, now this rises to 400. And when the sugar rises to 400, assuming the brain is assuming that there isn't enough sugar present in the system, the brain doesn't know that there is insulin resistance. It just knows that there isn't enough sugar because it got an SOS signal from the cells. Now, there is lots and lots of glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis. The blood sugar begins to rise. And along with the rise in blood sugar, the insulin begins to rise. So the beta cell pancreas, now they are working because this brain again sends signals to the beta cells and asks the beta cells to manufacture more and more insulin. So now more and more insulin is being produced. So you've got a state of hyperinsulinemia, you've got a state of hyperglycemia, but the door wouldn't open. The cell begins to starve. The person starts to develop weakness. When you've got this excess amount of blood sugar, this person is now classified as a diabetic. No matter what the cause is, whether it's a type 1 diabetes, total absence or lack of insulin, or partial deficiency of insulin, or this is because of insulin resistance. Insulin is there, blood sugar is there, liver is all right, everything is fine, the door just wouldn't open. So this is insulin resistance. And when that happens, this excessive amount of blood sugar, now it is going to come into this excessive amount of blood sugar, now it is going to go into the urine. The person is going to pass lots and lots of urine. So now the kidneys are working overtime. So there is nocturia. The person is passing lots and lots of urine. Because of absence of sugar inside the cell, the person begins to be weak. Along with that, the brain sends signals to the GI tract and asks the GI tract to increase the appetite. So now you become hungry. So what it does is it asks the GI tract, it asks the stomach, it asks the intestines to eat more. So now the person develops polyphagia. So the person begins to eat more in order to maintain a blood sugar level, in order to give sugar to the cells. The cells are starved because of not the absence of sugar, but because of because the door is locked, the door doesn't open. And so now the person begins to eat more. So person eats more, sugar obviously rises, it doesn't go in, and then there's more effect. But the troubling part is that with all of this, as the person gets weaker and weaker, and there's lots and lots of sugar around, the excess sugar in the blood vessels, because it has to stay somewhere, so it stays in the blood vessels, and that's where you measure sugar. This is actually vasculotoxic. It injures the vessels. The greater the amount of blood sugar, the more injury to the blood vessels. And this has been shown with experiments. So when that happens, this causes a state of hypoxia. The blood vessels will not get enough oxygen, so they go into a state of hypoxia. When that happens, the blood vessels will narrow down, and with that, they become fibrotic. So they're going to narrow down. And when they become narrowed down, all the organs of the body, wherever the blood vessels are, they will be affected. That means not only the kidneys, but the heart, the liver, the skin. That's why in people who've got diabetes and they've got chronic diabetes, you can see them from a distance that they've got pale skin. You can see their hands, you can see the fingers, the spindly fingers, shiny, spindly, pale fingers, because of lack of of blood supply, because excessive amount of glucose is going to damage the blood vessels and cause systemic vascular disease. And that's why diabetes mellitus is called as a systemic illness, because it affects everything from the hair to the to your toes. Now, so this is what diabetes really is in a nutshell. That means excessive amount of blood sugar. So what can you do about it? Well, in order to prevent these complications, which are the vascular complications, and obviously there'll be other complications as well. They all start from this. You need to bring the blood sugar down. But how are you going to bring the blood sugar down unless you unlock this door? If you check the insulin levels, they will be pretty high. And this door is locked because of one thing, and that is fat. That means adipose tissue. Excessive amount of adipose tissue fat is the one which jams this door. That means people who are fat. And we know that visceral fat, the fat which is around your belly, is the main cause of this. Anybody who's got fat around the belly, they haven't got fat elsewhere, but that is around the belly. That's a sign that may also have underlying visceral fat. And visceral fat is one which is present on all of your internal bodily organs. And when that happens, you've got fatty liver disease, you've got fatty pancreas disease. So the pancreas are actually covered with fat, and because of this, then you'll have insulin resistance. Until and unless you bring the weight down, until and unless you stop eating fatty things, you stop eating sugary things, especially fructose. If there was one thing that you need to stop, and that is fructose. Fructose is present in all the artificial drinks, it's present in lots and lots and lots of artificial foods. Fructose is one sole element which causes excessive amount of fat deposition, and with fat deposition, you'll get jammed cellular doors. Jammed cellular doors are going to cause excessive amount of glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, courtesy of the brain, increase in blood sugar levels. Greater the blood sugar levels, greater the vascular disease. Greater the vascular disease, more the end organ failures. So you need to bring the insulin resistance down, and that is for fat. You need to bring the not only diet, but also have to lose weight by regular exercise. So I hope you've had some fairly basic idea about what diabetes is and why it is increasing so much. We now see that in South Asia, Pakistan now ranks number one when it comes to prevalence of diabetes. It's about somewhere around 31.5% of the population. That means in 100, 31 people have confirmed diabetes, and this is absolutely alarming, because in 5 to 10 years time, these are the people who will end up with vascular disease of one kind or another. There'll be diabetic complications, diabetic feet, diabetic eyes, diabetic kidneys, diabetic heart. So you can imagine the burden on the healthcare system, the burden on the household, and the financial burden. And the easiest solution is bring the fat down, make them exercise, and diabetes is reversible. It's just like lots of other conditions, multi-system, which are reversible. One of them is diabetes. If you act early, diabetes is reversible. Thank you.